Imagine being so desperate to save your political career that you decide to weaponize the king. Not metaphorically, but literally dragging King Charles into Parliament less than a week after what everyone expects will be an electoral bloodbath, hoping that the pomp and pageantry of a state opening will somehow distract everyone from the fact that your party just got absolutely demolished at the polls. That is exactly what Keir Starmer is reportedly planning to do in May, scheduling the King's speech for potentially May 12th or 13th, conveniently just days after local elections on May 7th that are expected to see Labour massacred by Reform UK and other parties. The logic is genuinely brilliant in its cynicism. It will be much harder for someone to challenge the Prime Minister and say we need to go in a different direction when the King is about to come to Parliament to announce what we are doing for the next year. In other words, use the constitutional authority and grandeur of the monarchy as a human shield against your own backbenchers who want you gone. It is political survival instinct at its most shameless, and the fact that senior Labour figures like Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, and Andy Burnham are reportedly on manoeuvres suggest that Starmer's increasingly desperate tactics might not be enough to save him. Quick favor, if you are absolutely living for this level of political desperation and constitutional manipulation, smash that subscribe button right now. Over 94% of you watching have not subscribed yet. It is completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and helps us keep bringing you these moments where British politics becomes stranger than any fiction writer could imagine. Cheers if you did. Now back to the spectacular chaos. So let us unpack exactly what is happening here, because this is genuinely extraordinary political maneuvering that tells you everything about how panicked Starmer and his team are about what is coming in May. The state opening of Parliament is one of the most important constitutional events in the British political calendar. It is when the King, resplendent in full regalia, travels from Buckingham Palace to Westminster in a golden carriage, puts on the imperial state crown, and reads out the government's legislative agenda for the coming year. It is theatre, it is tradition, it is constitutional gravitas embodied in a single ceremony. It is also supposed to be scheduled based on the needs of the parliamentary calendar and the government's legislative program, not as a defensive political tactic to protect the Prime Minister from being ousted by his own party. But that appears to be exactly what is happening. The PM is believed to be lining up the state opening of Parliament for May 12th or 13th, which would be less than a week after the local elections on May 7th. The timing is not coincidental. Laying out a new slate of legislation would be a way of drawing a line under what looks like being a bloodbath for Labour. It is a reset button, a chance to say, okay, the local elections were terrible, but let us not dwell on that. Let us look forward to this exciting new legislative program that the King himself has just announced. It is damage control disguised as constitutional procedure, and the cynicism is almost admirable in its boldness. The reason this tactic might actually work, at least temporarily, is explained by a government source who told the BBC that the King's speech would blunt an expected backlash against Starmer's agenda. The logic is brutally simple. It will be much harder for somebody to challenge a PM and say we need to go in a different direction when the King is about to come to Parliament to announce what we are doing for the next year. In other words, you cannot very well stage a leadership challenge when the King has just formally announced the government's program in front of both houses of Parliament, the assembled dignitaries, and a national television audience. It would look chaotic, disrespectful to the monarchy, and constitutionally messy. So by scheduling the King's speech immediately after the local elections, Starmer creates a window where it becomes very difficult for his critics to move against him, buying himself precious time to try to recover politically. It is genuinely clever, if by clever you mean cynically manipulative of constitutional traditions for personal political survival. The state opening is supposed to be about announcing the government's legislative priorities, not about protecting the Prime Minister from his own backbenchers. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Starmer is clearly in desperate times. Speculation has been mounting about his prospects of survival, which is genuinely remarkable considering he was propelled into number 10 with a massive majority just last year. Most prime ministers with landslide victories can expect at least a few years of relative security before their own party starts plotting against them. Starmer is facing existential questions about his leadership before he has even completed a year in office. That is not just a bad honeymoon period. That is a marriage that is already heading for divorce court. The big hitters who are reportedly on manoeuvres are who's who of Labour heavyweights. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, has always been seen as someone with leadership ambitions and a significant base of support among the party membership. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has been one of Labour's most visible and articulate performers since the election, regularly appearing on television and radio to defend government policy. Andy Burnham, the Manchester mayor, has been a perennial nillerman in Labour leadership contests but remains hugely popular in parts of the party and has successfully built a powerful political base in Greater Manchester. The fact that all three are being named as potential successors tells you that people are not just idly speculating about a post-Starmer Labour Party. They're actively thinking about who comes next and positioning themselves accordingly. The mayoral and council elections on May 7th are seen as a critical moment, which is rather understated language for what could be a complete disaster for Labour. Despite the government having controversially delayed some of the contests, which itself became a major political story about Labour being afraid of voters, the elections that are going ahead are expected to be brutal. Labour insiders fear that Reform UK is poised to make huge gains in traditional Labour heartlands, which will be both electorally damaging and symbolically devastating. These are areas that have voted Labour for generations, places where Labour support was supposed to be rock solid, and they are now potentially about to elect Reform councillors and mayors. That represents a fundamental realignment of British politics, and if it happens on Starmer's watch, his position becomes almost impossible to defend. The fact that a government source was willing to speak to the BBC and explicitly admit that the King's speech is being scheduled to protect Starmer from political backlash tells you how openly this tactic is being discussed within government circles. It is not even a secret conspiracy. It is an acknowledged political strategy that they are confident enough to brief journalists about. That level of openness suggests either remarkable confidence that the plan will work or complete desperation where they have run out of other options and are willing to try anything. Downing Street, following the usual playbook when something politically sensitive leaks, refused to comment on speculation, saying the date will be announced in the normal way. But another source helpfully pointed out that it was common knowledge that the government was looking at a state opening in the spring, suggesting May was often the month chosen. This is classic political communications, officially denying nothing while also confirming the basic story through anonymous sources who provide context and justification. It allows the government to plant the story and gauge reaction without officially committing to anything. The detail about the current parliamentary session having run since July 2024, which is longer than normal, provides a technical justification for having a state opening in May. It is not just a cynical political move. They can argue it is simply time for a new session based on the parliamentary calendar. The fact that the timing also happens to provide perfect political cover after disastrous local elections is just a fortunate coincidence. Except, of course, nobody believes in coincidences in politics, and the timing is so perfectly convenient that it is obviously deliberate. The looming problems for Starmer were dramatically underlined by that stark poll showing Labour faces being put to the sword in Wales by Plaid Cymru and Reform UK. The party appears doomed to lose the First Minister post for the first time since devolution, with support dwindling even further since the last YouGov research in September. Wales has been a Labour stronghold for generations, the kind of place where Labour dominance was simply assumed as a fact of political life. The prospect of Labour not just losing an election in Wales but being relegated to third or even fourth place represents a political earthquake. If Labour cannot hold Wales, where can they hold? What does it say about their appeal across the rest of the United Kingdom if their support has collapsed so spectacularly in one of their traditional heartlands? The image of Keir Starmer goading Starmer at the final PMQs before Christmas, pointing to infighting in his own ranks and branding his cabinet turkeys while joking that all his MPs want for Christmas is a new leader, perfectly captures how dire the political situation has become. When the leader of the opposition can make jokes about your own party wanting you gone, and have those jokes land with laughter in the chamber, you know your authority has been seriously undermined. The fact that this happened at the last PMQs before Christmas means it will be the lasting image of Starmer's year, the note on which 2024 ends, a Prime Minister being openly mocked about his own MPs wanting him replaced. The constitutional implications of using the King's speech as a political shield are genuinely concerning, even if the tactic itself is legal and procedurally proper. The monarchy is supposed to be above politics, a unifying symbol that represents a nation rather than any particular party or government. When a prime minister starts scheduling constitutional events based on internal party political calculations, it risks dragging the monarchy into political disputes in a way that undermines the careful neutrality that the royal family works so hard to maintain. King Charles cannot refuse to give a king's speech just because the timing is politically convenient for the government, and he cannot publicly complain about being used as a political prop. He has to turn up, read the speech, and maintain the dignified neutrality that his position requires. But everyone watching will understand what is really happening, and it makes the monarchy complicit, however unwillingly, in a political maneuver designed to protect a struggling prime minister. The broader pattern of behavior from the Starmer government is becoming increasingly clear and increasingly troubling from a democratic perspective. First, they delayed local elections using local government reorganization as justification, which looked like they were afraid of facing voters. Now they are reportedly scheduling the King's speech to create a political shield against their own backbenchers after those delayed elections happen anyway and produce terrible results.